If you've ever been called difficult for standing on principle, this framework is for you. This framework will change how you're perceived. I'm David Pettrone Swalve, and in the next 20 minutes, you'll learn the four-step process that principled leaders use to stop being mislabeled and start being heard. Good afternoon, leaders. I'm David Pettrone Swalve, founder of Authentara and author of Pirate Jokes Aren't Funny. How many times have you been labeled difficult when you were simply being clear about a principle? Type yes in the chat if you've ever been called not a team player, holding the line on something you believed was right. Well, whether you're watching this live or later, if that question hits home, you're not alone. Principled leaders get mislabeled constantly. Today, we're solving a specific problem. What happens when standing for principle gets you labeled as difficult and how to fix it? Not team players code or you make me uncomfortable with clarity. This happens in conflict avoidant cultures where disagreement gets confused with disrespect. The research shows that this costs organizations millions of dollars, not just in talent, but in the innovation that dies when people stop speaking up. In 20 minutes, you'll get a research-backed framework and a tool that you start to use this week. Let's get to it. The Authentara Blueprint is a research-based framework built to solve a core leadership problem. We keep rewarding performance over practice, culture fit instead of culture add. Your manager promotes the person who delivers results but burns out 3 teammates doing it. Your organization celebrates the leader who hits every metric, but there's a trail of people who don't trust them. That's the price and the cost of reward performance over practice. It punishes integrity. It teaches people that it doesn't matter how you show up as long as your numbers look good or you look good. Most leadership systems don't give people the tools to lead. They expect them to figure it out. No frames, no shared language, no way to grow with intention. Today we're focusing on one of our 4 core principles. It's an attribute called guiding principles. It articulated evidence-backed convictions that don't shift with context or convenience. And here's what we'll cover today as we talk about it. First, we'll anchor the attribute, what guiding principles are and aren't. We'll see it in action with some real stories where principles got misread. We're going to pressure test it. We're going to give you a framework for alignment versus agreement. And then what we do, as always, we're going to give us a chance to do some authentic practice. And we'll just call it Charlie's Reframe so you know that we're going in that direction. Bob Marley wrote rebel music for moments exactly like this, when principles make you inconvenient for people who prefer comfort over clarity. When standing for something real makes you the problem in the room, well, that's not a real problem. We anchor each webinar with music, and this week it is Bob Marley's Rebel Music, because neuroscience tells us and shows that pairing content with sound creates stronger memory encoding. You might already associate a song with your own principles, but if you don't, what I'll ask is that you choose one. It will become your behavioral anchor. Well, that's what we're going to do today, and we're going to look at when action actually costs you something. So stick with us today. Let's try the tools and let's get started. Here's the truth. Most organizations won't admit to you when you get labeled not a team player for standing on principle. The system isn't confused about what you're doing. It knows exactly what you're doing, but just prefers comfort over clarity. Organizations reward agreeableness over integrity. They don't eliminate principled leaders. They just teach them to stay silent or leave. And silence soon becomes fault. Teams stop challenging assumptions, start performing agreement. Culture fit becomes code for compliance over creativity. Productivity doesn't collapse, it erodes. And ultimately, it erodes, and you'll see it when it's replaced by meetings full of nods instead of meetings with big ideas. One day you wake up and you're wondering, what happened to the innovation here on our organization? What happened to the trust, to the people who used to care enough to argue about how we should move forward? That's how you lose your best people, not through compensation or benefits, but through a culture that punishes clarity and rewards commitment. The two stories that you're about to hear reveal when framework can transform perception and when a framework exists to go ahead and protect. And so let's go ahead and take a look at these. Two principled leaders, two principled individuals, two very different outcomes. Here's Bill's story. In my book, Pirate Jokes Aren't Funny, I opened chapter 8 on guiding principles with a story that shaped how I understand what it means to stand for something when it costs you everything. When I was 17, I was tutoring Bill's daughter in chemistry at their home. After I arrived one evening, I was introduced for the first time to Bill's father-in-law. And a short time after Bill's father-in-law left, the phone rang. His wife picked it up, and Bill said he could hear on the other end phone his mother-in-law. And Bill's wife answered a few questions until on the other end, Bill said he heard mother-in-law say, "What kind of young man is in your house?" The subtext was clear. This wasn't about safety. This was about who my hair looked like and the color of my eyes, and more specifically, the genetic makeup of who I wasn't. Bill, at the time, took the phone from his wife. His voice was steady, unapologetic. He said, "I'll tell you what kind of young man he is. He's one of the best." Simple, clear, principled. He hung up the phone and told his wife, "I'm sure I'll hear of this later." And years later, at 89 years old, Bill told me that story. And I told him the truth. I know how you felt in the moment because I've lived with that same feeling almost every day. The weight of being misread before even entering the room, of being questioned before being known. Bill's principle was simple. Everyone deserves to be judged by their character, not by their blank arbitrary bias. His in-laws didn't want better communication. They wanted compliance. Now, on the other side is Charlie. You can meet Charlie. You might know him. He's a CFO with 30 years of experience. He's been instrumental in positioning his company for acquisition. He's always been a high performer and always delivered results consistently. His leadership team called him a pariah, labeled him not a team player. Why? His famous line, "I've been doing this for 30 years. We know what works." Well, Charlie's principle was the financial rigor, protecting the company from risk. But here's the critical difference. Charlie's team wanted the same thing he did. They wanted the company to succeed. They just couldn't hear his principle through his defensive, ego-driven delivery. Bill's system was opposed to his principle. Charlie's system shared his goal. They just couldn't hear him. Bill's principle cost him comfort. Charlie's cost him credibility. Comfort's temporary. Credibility is potentially forever. When we choose to have comfort over clarity, we trade something permanent. We trade something permanent for something that fades the minute the meeting ends. So, what is guiding principles really? Guiding principles are articulated, evidence-based convictions that don't shift with context or convenience. They anchor your decision. Conditions are uncertain. And that's straight from the Authentara blueprint. Why it matters. In a workforce spanning 5 generations, in a chaos, hybrid work, AI disruption, and constant pressure to bend, guiding principles define the why when there's no clear playbook. But most leaders confuse principles with preferences. So let's be clear. What's not principles? Policies, those change with compliance. Not a principle, preference, those change with comfort. Not a principle, platitudes. Well, they were never real to begin with. So how would you test the criteria to know that you actually have a principle? First, it's non-negotiable. In other words, would you hold the line on this if it cost you something? 2, principles are observable. Others can see you live it, or are you just talking about it? And then it's the transferability. Can you teach it to someone else with clarity? McKinsey Leadership Institute calls principled clarity a stability anchor. It buffers teams from decision, fatigue, and burnout. Well, why? Well, because when your people don't understand your why, they don't need to agree with every how. They just need to know you're not making it up as you go along. So help people understand the why. That's what Bill did. He didn't ask his parents in law to agree. He made his principle clear. And that's what Charlie needed to learn. And when he did learn it, actually his credibility was able to be restored. But here's the breakthrough most leaders miss. And that's actually what we're going to explore next. You don't need agreement. You actually need alignment. Most leaders confuse two. Here's the difference. Agreement means everyone thinks the same. Full consensus is required. And honestly, it's impossible in complex environments, and it silences dissent. Alignment means everyone understands the why. They have a shared purpose, not shared opinion. It's really sustainable, and it clarifies the direction for everyone. Think about it. Your team doesn't need to agree that financial rigor is the most important value, but they do need to understand that when the CF flags something, it's not about ego, it's about fiduciary responsibility. Research from the PA Times Online and Conversant tells us that design conversations for alignment, not consensus, have greater outcomes. So how do you create alignment without agreement? Well, you can see that bottom left-hand side, there's a 4-step framework we're introducing for you today. First, clarify the principle. Name it plainly. I won't compromise transparency. Or in this example we're giving, I protect financial rigor. 2, connect it to shared goals. Because our team's credibility depends on accurate data, or, for example, because one audit failure actually cost us all our jobs. 3, communicate what behavior looks like. Get specific. That means I won't have to approve this report until data is verified. Invite dialogue, not agreement. Say explicitly, you don't have to agree with every detail, but you need to understand why. Just that sentence alone can help transform everyone's perception. Now, before you use this framework, you need to pressure test your decisions. And here's a 3-question filter that you can use to ensure that your decisions actually are grounded in principle. 1, would I want this announced on microphone, whatever action or whatever decision that I made? Would I want everyone to? 2, would I make this choice if it affected someone that I love? My dad used to tell me, hey, ask people for advice and tell them, hey, I'm talking to you like you're my brother. Think of you like my brother, because it changes the way in which you think about what you want to do. And number 3, a 3-question filter to make sure you have decisions on principle. Does this move make me closer to the lead that I want to be? If you can answer yes to all 3, then you're leading from principle. And as the framework shows, when the system shares your goal, it's going to be great. But when it doesn't, well, let's talk a little bit about what happens when it doesn't. Be brutally honest, because the framework can't transform just the outcome, and it doesn't necessarily always get you what you want. But when it does, it works great, because the 4-step framework transforms perceptions, but it only does so when system shares your goal. Charlie's team wanted the company to succeed. They wanted financial integrity. They couldn't hear his principle through his defensive, ego-driven delivery. That's when alignment saves you. That's when framework can restore your credibility. When it doesn't work, when does this framework not work? Well, sometimes your principle isn't a communications problem. It's a value problem with the system. Bill in-laws didn't want better communication. They wanted him to stay silent about bias and discrimination. They wanted compliance, not clarity. No amount of reframing would have changed their minds, and that's okay. The framework doesn't guarantee you keep your job. It doesn't promise alignment will save your position. What it guarantees is that people will understand why you made your choice, even if they fire you for it. I know that hits close to home for some of my longest and closest friends, but it's real. When the system shares your goal, this framework transforms how you're perceived. When the system opposes your principle, this framework protects your integrity while you exit. Either way, you keep yourself. Bill chose comfort loss over principle loss, and he'd do it again. Charlie chose clarity over ego, and ultimately, when he did that, it saved his credibility. The difference really isn't courage, it's context. And now you know how to read it. So let's put it into practice, because every week we like to practice. Here's how Charlie did it. Here's how he got it to the reframe. Here's how he transformed and saved his credibility, the organization. Remember when he said how he got labeled before, because he was saying constantly, I've been doing this for 30 years. We know how it works. Well, the principle was there. The delivery, ego first, defensive, dismissive, it wasn't. So given that critical context, Charlie's team didn't know they shared the goal because they couldn't understand what he's saying. So he put it into the 4-step framework. Charlie worked with me to rewrite his principled position. Here's what he wrote, and here's what he started to share. Here's what I'm anchored in: financial rigor. Over 30 years, I've seen companies fail when they cut corners on diligence. My role as CFO is to protect us from risk. You don't have to agree with every detail that I'm flagging, but I need you to understand why I won't sign off without verification. This is about my ego or experience. It's about fiduciary responsibility to all of us. Notice what changed. Principle named clearly: financial rigor, financial and fiduciary duty, connected to a shared goal, protecting the company from failure. He invited understanding, not agreement, and removed his defensiveness. Same principle, completely different perception. And let's face it, we've all had our Snickers moment, talking like Betty White when stress hijacks the room. Charlie just learned to eat the Snickers before the meeting. And here's what happened. Within 2 weeks, Charlie's team stopped calling him a pariah. Within 2 months, they started coming to him for guidance, not just compliance. His credibility was restored and amplified because the system wanted what Charlie wanted. They just couldn't hear it. That's the difference one disciplined reframe can make. And it's a skill you can practice right now. When you listen to Bob Marley's Rebel music, there's a self-reflective question that keeps coming back. Why can't we be what we want to be? And it cuts through all the noise that's going on. The question actually makes me pause. That's the question every principled leader faces. Why can't we be what we know is right? Rebel music wasn't noise, it was purpose with rhythm. That's the principled leadership sound. That song reminds me of principled leadership. When he stood in the kitchen and said he's one of the best, when it would have been easier to stay silent, he chose principle over peace. That's rebellion with integrity, quiet, grounded, and necessary. Charlie learned to say, here's what I'm anchored in: financial rigor. Instead of, I've been doing this for 30 years. He chose clarity over ego. You can face the same choice every time when someone calls you not a team player. You face the same choice. You can either leverage the framework you've learned to live by today, clarify, connect, communicate, and invite, or you can remain silent. But to make your own rebellion heard, to transform your culture, to lead authentically, you have to let your rebellion be heard. Not louder, just clearer. If you want more practice like this, reach out to me about the Authentic Leader Certification by Authentara. Real reps, real transformation. If you're a decision maker and want this framework for your organization, let's talk about how we can help teams turn clarity into credibility without losing your edge. Because the most principled leaders aren't just misunderstood. They're inconvenient. They're not comfortable in the moment. They're rebels. They're rebels because the system wants status quo. And every system that values comfort over truth needs you anyway. Thanks for being here. Thanks for leading. And remember, today is the day.